Hello and welcome back to the One Stop Psychology podcast. Today we've got a very interesting topic, something that a lot of people talk about, and there seems to be a lack of understanding and awareness about the impact we can have in terms of the kind of phrases and words we use on other people. And we thought we should talk about this and nip it in the bud rather than talk about only mental illnesses, because how we behave towards each other also plays a major role in terms of how other people feel. So we are calling this podcast "Why Statements Like Hakuna Matata May Not Work for Everybody." We have Mr. Harishankar with us, and I'm Bhaskar. We're the two contributors for One Stop Psychology. And let's just get started then. Hari, what are we saying when we say Hakuna Matata statements?
So I'm sure, when we watch Disney movies or some of these other motivational movies, there's a very brief period of motivation. So, for example, it could be Hakuna Matata in the case of The Lion King, or it could be, let's say, All is Well in the case of Three Idiots, right? Now, these statements are very often universal in nature. Universal in the sense they are not targeted to a specific individual per se, and these are kind of generalized universal statements. Now, you asked what is the issue with using these statements. Two things I would say. First, they may appear to be a bit shallow in its depth because you're not actually understanding the problem, you're not understanding what is probably contributing to the problem, but we are jumping into a conclusion, or sorry, we are jumping into an intervention. All is well, or don't worry, be happy. These are other statements that we are making. So, like I said, two things about this. One, we may not really understand the problem in its actual depth, and then we are jumping into an intervention. So that's one thing. The second thing is, when you are the recipient of these statements, when you say, let's say, share a problem with somebody, and the response that you get is, "Don't worry, it'll be fine," or "Why don't you try doing this? I'm sure this will help you." So the problem is we are jumping into an intervention without really understanding the depth of it, or without really understanding what exactly is happening, what is contributing to the problem. So that's one thing. And some recipients may also experience this undue pressure. They may believe that this intervention should work, or this statement should work. However, because of whatever reasons, they don't really work to a large extent. Even if they do work, how for how long do they actually sustain? So that's the second thing associated with it. So I think that's why I feel that before we jump into an intervention, when we hear our friends out, or when somebody shares their problems, this is something that I feel we should probably consider.
Yeah, and I can almost hear people screaming who are listening and saying that, but sometimes this thing works. That I told my friend that it will be fine, and my friend was fine. Or I told somebody, it's okay, things will get better, and then they took it in a positive light, and it helped them in their life or something like that. I can almost hear someone listening to this screaming, saying that, no, Harishankar sir, you're wrong. But I think from a personal perspective, if I introspect on a lot of times when I have made these statements to somebody personally, saying that it's fine, XYZ, you'll be okay. It's probably come from a place where I didn't want to have a conversation, and I just wanted to avoid the conversation. Uh, I didn't want to know the depth of their problem, but I still wanted to be there as their friend. But I couldn't tell them directly, that I don't care. But like I have to be here because I'm your friend. So I said, I'll be fine. Don't worry about it. This is life. Shit happens in life, or whatever people keep saying, right? Uh, so I think that's another thing, that the recipient may not be aware, but the person who says these statements usually is also trying to avoid a conversation where they don't want to hear all the problem that the other person is having, and therefore the statements is made so that there is like a barrier saying that I don't want to listen to you anymore, but it'll be fine, uh, which is unfortunate. But I think it's an honest thing that I'm speaking of, and all my friends who are listening in, if you are my friends and if you are listening in, then I haven't done this to you, I promise. So, what about the people who are saying that this sort of thing works? Because a lot of times, what I realize is people think this is positive psychology. They think positive psychology is about being positive all the time, but they don't realize that positive psychology is about coping in the right way. Where sometimes you cope with a problem, sometimes you cope with the emotion, sometimes you try and protect yourself when you can't protect yourself from either of the aforementioned things. So I think positive psychology somehow gets diluted in its understanding because people think it's about making these motivational statements like, if you frown there are 70 muscles involved, if you smile there are 14 muscles involved, and nonsense like this. I keep seeing this on social media and it really bothers me because, first of all, that's not true. Second of all, if you just smile, you can't be happy suddenly. So the smile is like the facial feedback hypothesis is a hypothesis. It's not a established theory. Therefore, the name is facial feedback hypothesis. If you smile, doesn't mean your day will go great all the time. What do you think?
I think I completely agree with you on that. Okay, now when I look at it, there's this need to think positive, be positive. And if you read the case of Pollyanna, it talks more about this, as in how you are expected to be happy all the times. You are expected to be cheerful, bubbly, positive all the time. Now, there's no harm in doing all of this. There's no harm in making statements like Hakuna Matata and things like that. What I want to emphasize on is the context. So, two things about this context. If you are talking to somebody who, probably requires a more in-depth intervention, this may appear to be very shallow, and they may feel invalidated by this statement. See, it's like if somebody is not able to go to sleep, and somebody just responds to it, why don't you try sleeping, or why don't you be happy, it'll probably cure your depression, right? So these statements, and I'm talking about them from the recipient's perspective, as in they may this is why I emphasized on the word shallow, and this may make the person feel invalidated. So I totally agree with you on that point.
What also happens is when someone hears this, I think depression is like a classic case where everyone thinks it's a normal thing and it's not a thing to be made a big deal about. And if you just laugh and smile, you'll be fine. Uh, and this is a major cause of concern because when you make this sort of statement to somebody who's depressed or suicidal, saying that, be happy and life will be better, everyone goes through trouble, what is the difference in yours, or whatever like that, um, this invalidation adds to the problem, right? Because you feel that nobody understands you, because these people who are making these statements aren't really trying to understand you. They're trying to help, but they're trying to solve your problem without even trying to understand what the problem is. So I think there is this understanding of, solution focused therapy where uh, you try and listen to the person and then immediately try and solve the problem. And that's where therapy, I think, helps a lot of people, because the therapist engages in listening to you first of all, understanding the entire context without trying to tell you, life is troublesome for everybody and your problems don't matter because even I have problems. That sort of understanding is just stupid, I think. And from a personal point of view, I think if you're trying to be there for your friend, for your family member, uh, I think you should be there wholeheartedly and try and listen to them completely, or else just back off and say, I don't have time for this. At least that honesty will be appreciated probably. But because there are societal pressures and all of that, that's probably an unavoidable sort of thing.
That's true. That's true. Along with this pressure to think positive and be positive and things like that, I think what also happens in these cases is we fail to accept some of our negative emotions. So there is a sense of urgency in both the individual who is experiencing it and the individual who is observing it. So it could be their peers, families, anybody else who is observing it, to reject those negative experiences, emotions, feelings, and like I said earlier, jump into a solution. Whereas probably that emotion requires some more time. It could be, let's say, the grief that you are experiencing after a breakup or a loss, or let's say a rejection that you experienced, right? So rather than making such positive statements, quote unquote positive statements like, I think it's time to move on. Let's focus on something else. It'll distract you. So these may work temporarily, but then in the long run, in order to process the grief or the rejection or any other emotions, it's very important to accept these feelings and work on them in a more in a little more depth as compared to what some of these statements try to achieve.
Okay, so now you're a clinical psychologist, right? I'm a lay person, for instance, right? I'm not a clinical psychologist, so yeah, I'm a lay person. My question would be this: when you say work on these feelings, right? What do you mean? Like, if somebody listens to my problem completely and I'm able to enunciate the entire issue that I'm going through, is that enough, or is there more to it, or what happens? What do you mean when you say it's shallow to make these statements and we should listen to the other person? Is that by itself enough, or what does a person do? How do you know if somebody needs help or not help or something like that?
Right, right, absolutely. Okay, so to begin with, there are three things that we can do when you have this urge to make a statement like this. So we can ask ourselves whether we have empathized with the other person completely. Do we get their perspective of the problem, or are we trying to jump into an intervention? There's also this phenomenon called one-upmanship, right? Let's say, for example, somebody says, I hurt my left arm. Then somebody else may respond to you, oh, that's absolutely nothing. I had fractured my left arm. Let me talk more about it, right? Like I was discussing earlier, let's ask ourselves: have we empathized with the other person completely, and or are we bringing in our own biases, our own perspectives of the problem? That's one thing. The second thing that we can probably ask ourselves, or do rather than asking, is to validate whatever they're going through. Now, say for example, if somebody asks me, and why are you not excited about Game of Thrones? And I'm a person who have not seen any episodes of these this series. So probably the other person cannot understand the lack of excitement in me related to Game of Thrones. But that doesn't mean that I'm not, my experience is not genuine, or whatever I'm experiencing is probably not true. So, validate, understand that the other person's emotions or whatever they're going through is also genuine, irrespective of the context, or irrespective of what else is contributing to it. So that would be my second suggestion: validate after empathizing. And then there would be this urge to jump into an intervention, because when somebody starts talking to you, there are two things. One, they might be seeking a solution from you, or they probably just want a listening ear. So identify this urge to jump into an intervention, and then, like I said earlier, we can try focusing on the other two questions: empathizing and validating with the other person.
Yeah, I think that's an important point you've made, because I think the rule of thumb is probably to listen first completely, and then ask the other person, do they want a solution or not. I think a lot of people are uncomfortable about asking the other person if they need a solution. So if they ask for if you ask them that, do you want me to help you solve this issue, I think then that sort of lets you gauge whether you need to give a solution or not, or whether you need to intervene or not. So that's an important question. Maybe we can ask rather than interpret, because we have our own biases. And then there is this entire idea of egocentric thought, right, where I see the world from my point of view and others' views are not as relevant as mine. And therefore, when they tell me about their problems, I might engage in one upmanship, or I might try and solve their problems from my perspective, which may not be the right solution, right? Because it worked for me, it may not work for everybody, and it's not like scientifically based or anything. Whereas therapy is like that. Therapy strategies, etc., are tested and replicated and tested again. So that's interesting. Uh, I have a friend who's at Nimans, and she keeps talking about the process of therapy being very important as well. And I think that's something that we can, sort of plug here, where the process of listening to somebody is as important as giving the solution to them. Um, I have one last thing to understand. Is there a gender difference here? Could there be a gender difference in terms of how people deal with this sort of issue or how they behave. Because I feel, I'm not sure, I don't know scientifically if this is relevant or not, but I feel like maybe males are slightly different in terms of how they deal with this in coping strategies as compared to females. I'm not sure. What do you know much about it?
No, I don't think there's any empirical consensus on this fact that males and females react or cope differently in this situation. More than gender, I think there are two other variables that may play a very important role. One is personality. So, say for example. You are somebody who has traits of patience, who has traits of non-judgmentality. These traits will help you listen in a better manner. That's one thing. On the other hand, let's say if you are somebody who has a need to let's say feel valued or get validated by others, so the need to please somebody. Now here, what could also happen is if somebody is high on this particular trait, there is a tendency to jump into an intervention as compared to listening wholeheartedly and things like that. So I think personality plays a very important role. The other factor that I would like to discuss are social constructs. So, for example, social constructs of gender, how males should behave and females should behave, especially in this context while listening to somebody. So these pressures that originate from a social construct, gender roles can also play a role in individual differences in listening and reacting to such conversations.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Probably people want to stereotype genders and say males will be this way and females will be this way, and that's why you read a lot of articles that tell you all of that sort of thing. But I think what you say in terms of traits probably makes more sense than a gender difference in this sort of space. I think we've covered everything that we wanted to, and thanks Hari for joining us, and everyone listening in. Please follow our Instagram page. You're probably listening to this on Instagram, so please give us a like, or give a comment, or just a shout out to us. We are very happy to be doing this, and our community is growing. And we've also started therapy online for all of you, and the prices we've tried and kept as low as possible. So we've told the therapists, that this is a way for you to interact with a larger community. So they've been willing to put their prices down, and we hope that if you need help, you can find it with us. Thank you for listening in. We are the One Stop Psychology Podcast, and see you soon.